Hello. I'm going to be starting a web series about game mastering, and specifically about world creation and campaign creation, and hopefully referencing my own growth as a game master, telling you about some of my hangups, and um, sharing my aspiration to do better at that task, and kind of how to see your own improvement and your own ability to author things as the storyteller in a tabletop role playing game. So, to give you a little bit of background about myself, uh, I always had the aspiration to be a blogger about RPG stuff and gaming, but blogs are done. Um, People do not want to read more than a paragraph if they're in the internet, and if you want to make a point that's a little longer, you have the disposal of this massive and incredibly cool edifice called YouTube. So I am moving forward with that. So what is authored campaigning? What is the idea that you could do more than be hacking and slashing, or be in this quasi-renaissance, perfect gender equality, no, none of the problems that faced the pre-modern world type of environment? Um, My question is kind of why not do more? One of the most amazing things that tabletop role playing created was the ability to go someplace else, to dive into another environment. And the pre modern world was full of really incredible conflict and uh, just entirely different worldviews. Um, and that's one of the things that's really lacking from tabletop role playing right now is the idea that it's anything but just a little bit of a clone of our modern world without uh, the technology. Um, there's just this feeling of enlightenment about most of the campaign worlds that exist. Um, and I suggest that it's a lot more compelling to live in a world that's grittier. Um, and Game of Thrones speaks to that. I mean, there's really compelling women, even though gender roles are not equal in that world. There's really compelling players of different ethnicity. I'm sorry, characters of different ethnicity. Even though slavery is a very real thing that is confronted in Game of Thrones. So, what's the deal? Why bother? Aren't you there to be the game master and make sure it's fun for everyone? Well, absolutely. I mean, I like to invoke the three-quarter rule that three-quarters of the sessions for three-quarters of the people should be really fun. But that goes for you too. And so that means that if the game world and the meat and potatoes of the world are not of an aesthetic that really intrigues you and puts gas in your tank and fires your creativity, then it's not really going to be fun for you. And that's going to show as far as everyone else's fun level. So, being animated at the table, really being excited about your story and about what the players are kind of doing within the story. Like when you raise an eyebrow and you're like, wow, I'm going to have to narrate that, what you just did there. And that's a really interesting feeling, and that you're interacting and you're cooperating. And so your players are the protagonists. I mean, ultimately, like their fate is their own. And I believe in the idea that the world can be both sandboxy and have a story at the same time. Because the truth is that what people stumble into in front of them is usually what they do. And so player characters have this often awesome opportunity where they get job offers like as soon as they quit their last job. Um, and they see opportunities just hanging there for them to seize one fashion or another to be the good guys or the bad guys. And so that's the cooperative part, is what are they going to do about those things? But the canvas that's painted on maybe not the figures or the people, um, that's kind of yours to set up. And people like Arya Stark um, really tell you that the protagonist doesn't have to be in line with the world. You can have, if someone wants to play a female fencer in a world with really unfair gender roles, you know, you can sell that as a really protagonist role, and that'll be fun. Um, and the reason that you got to be having fun, and I think really maybe you should aspire to create something that's just a little bit more off key or different than your standard campaign world, which right now we default to this kind of almost Renaissance. Um, it's like Florence, basically. If you watch the new Da Vinci show, very cosmopolitan. If you move away from that default and you show other parts of the world, or you even immerse your characters in a different kind of a world, um, it's going to be a lot more gratifying because you're going to be exploring some interesting avenues of the imagination. And it's a big hobby. I mean, if you're running a session every week, you're also thinking about the game for a lot of hours of your life. I mean, the TV that you're watching and the books that you're reading are going to be in conversation with your game. Um, you are responsible as the storyteller, more than anyone else, for whether it's going to be an amazing experience. And everyone contributes, I'd say, equally. Or if everyone is contributing equally, then it is a way more fun and awesome experience. But you're kind of the responsible. You're the chief executive in a multi-branch system, and so you gotta take care of things. So if you're gonna move in a different direction, you gotta narrate. You gotta actually describe things. You gotta go through, like, you walk into the town, and you have to pay a gate tax, and guys pad you down. And how does your character react to, like, being searched as a smuggler? Or maybe, you see the person in front of you in the line bribing, and that's a lot of interaction and choice. There's not really a combat encounter there, but there's a lot of opportunity for storytelling. That's a whole scene that could lead in a whole number of directions, to the jail and escaping the jail, to, like, meeting the smugglers. Who knows? But you got to describe. When it's not goblins and politics, you actually have to do that. And of course, I have failings when it comes to that. I can get a little bit railroady, and I can assume that what I'm doing is interesting. Um, Part of that is because I draw most of my inspiration from game mastering from television and film, and I need to be constantly reminded that people have a stage of the imagination which is colored by their own influences, and so that goes back to description and actually playing out scenes, as opposed to assuming that when you abridge the transaction of the scene that everyone's going to imagine the same thing. I mean, the really iconic thing was that it happened to me was that I was running a sci-fi game and I didn't realize that no one had seen Alien. And so, the idea of, like, being stalked in a corridor by, the dark thing in your spaceship, like, that reference material wasn't there, and I needed to amp it up and actually show instead of tell. Um, so these guys are my inspiration. I mean, you may recognize some of them, and I'm not going to go into great detail besides saying that they all create worlds. They're authors. And they've made places where protagonists do unexpected things and progress. And you are invited to kind of live the role of the protagonist. Um, and you can imagine a number of people other than Orlando Bloom in Kingdom of Heaven, for example. Okay, so what are my goals for creating this next campaign? What are the things that I want to amp up to? I want to show a feeling of scale, that the players are in this really big world where cogs and wheels are turning. If you know the intro to Game of Thrones, that the metaphor, and just even the way the music, the canon of the song builds, that's a thrill, and you can break your back if you get too big, and so you need to kind of cycle between big and small. And so that's going to be a challenge. I'm going to try and lay out how I could achieve that goal for my next game, because there was kind of an overwhelming course towards infinity, which is always the case in level-based games, um, that kind of overwhelmed our last game. And we'll talk about mechanics and which rule set you might want to use if you want to run a campaign a little later. I'd also like this feeling of place. The really evocative music of people like Hans Zimmer, especially Hans Zimmer, who I believe is the Lord of the Rings score. Um, those they also kind of bring about this sensation of landscape. Um, if I could create a world that felt also like traveling to another, like getting in a plane and going someplace else when we sit down for a session, and you feel like you are in another world, then that's kind of half of it. That would be a great success if I could manage that. And I also want to stick with the feeling that this is a pre-modern world, that when you buy something, you may not be doing it with cash, and if you want to do something, you will probably have to do it with your own hands or with an animal. Um, and I think that really leverages the idea of player choice. That there's always, whenever you roll the dice, there are stakes, and whenever you invest effort. Um, and one of the things that's we're really distant from uh, right now because of the internet and Amazon and things like that is the idea that when you do something, it's not just a click away. That there's sort of a wager when you try to do something. Um, and especially for younger players, the idea that they might have to work to do something uh, is sort of foreign, but it's also a thrill as they progress and they realize that their character has some motivation, so that it's not all easy street. Um, Crusader Kings is a really nice medieval environment too. So I'm gonna go back to Harn, which was where I ran my last campaign that lasted a good long year, and we'll just drop out of the presentation for a second here and show you the world in a little bit more depth. Here it is. This is Celestia Productions' map of Harn. Um, Harn is a fully medieval setting, and that means that it needs to really obey some rules, its own rules, to make sense. Um, I don't know if you're like me, but one of those things that has always bothered me is when rivers don't flow downhill, or when there's no farmland to feed the people, and or when the population of a city is so much greater than the farmland that can support it. These are all questions that like are taken care of for you, and like that's one of the reasons that there are vast wildernesses, is because the cities are small. Um, and part of that means that the Thieves Guild maybe only has 10 guys, even in the biggest city in the kingdom that you're playing in. That means that the players have an opportunity to step up and become cool and not always be looking over their shoulder. At one point, there's the you're a turd on the block phase, and you're doing quests for the local quest master. But at some point, there's going to be the idea that there's external threats, that there's quests that involve journeys and going far away. Um, and the next question is, how do you get the characters to feel at home when you're going on these long-term, long-distance quests? How do you sustain the game once that's occurring? And once you're in that Alexander the Great phase, that's going to be my next great challenge. So hopefully I'm going to set up enough groundwork with these preparations that we're going to see over the course of this series that once the campaign gets going and we're in that phase, it's going to have enough steam to keep going. And especially one of the big things is engagement, player engagement. How we're going to keep everybody engaged, the sneaky backstabber, the ass kicker, the clever mage.